So President Biden may not be quite the attention seeker or attention getter that Donald Trump is, but compared to Trump, Biden delivers material results to the American people, even when the sensationalist media won't talk about it. For example, Biden just facilitated what is arguably the most pro-union, pro-worker, pro-labor decision in the past 80 years. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, so what am I talking about? Well, we're going to play a video here. We're not going to play the whole thing because it's like 8 minutes long, and we're going to discuss an article that was written in, I believe, the American Prospect, which covers this monumental decision, which almost certainly will not take headlines on CNN or the New York Times or MSNBC, certainly not Fox News. But this is good stuff. I will let, I think he's on the National Labor Relations Board, this gentleman here, or no, excuse me, it's from More Perfect Union. He's going to discuss this monumental decision, then we will unpack it together.
The National Labor Relations Board is expected to soon issue a major legal decision that would give workers a significantly stronger voice in the workplace. That decision, which could reestablish a policy called the Joy-Silk Doctrine, could make it considerably easier for workers to organize for better pay and benefits. Let me explain. As we know, public support for unions is very high, highest level in more than 50 years. Indeed, we've witnessed an extraordinary wave of unionization efforts at Starbucks, Amazon, Trader Joe's, REI, Chipotle, Apple stores, and many other places. Unfortunately, this enthusiasm for unionizing has been met by a powerful flood of union busting. Starbucks, Amazon, and many other companies have mounted high-pressure campaigns that aim to stifle workers' voices and prevent democracy in the workplace.
Very often these companies will fire, like they will preemptively fire or seek to, some way terminate employees who are moving to establish unions in the workforce. It's called union busting. It's very pervasive. And again, I'm not sure we're going to go through this entire thing. I highly doubt it. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and get straight to the article itself. So this is from the American Prospect. Biden's National Labor Relations Board brings workers' rights back from the dead. That's the headline. So the National Labor Relations Board, I'm going to screw this up, the NLRB, it's an independent agency, right? It's not really under the Department of Labor, and it basically enforces labor laws with respect to unionizing and labor violations and things like that. Now, like most other independent agencies, they do ultimately report to the president, but there's supposed to be an independent relationship there. Like President Biden doesn't control the day-to-day activities of that National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. But he does make appointments, right? So he's the one, when there's a vacancy, who the president does, the sitting president, makes key appointments to the NLRB. And President Biden's NLRB appointees have been the most robustly pro-union in decades at a bare minimum. And so the American Prospect goes into more detail. So it released an important ruling in many decades in a party line decision because, if I remember correctly, the NLRB, I think it's a 5-person board, or maybe a 6-person board, but the majority usually belongs to the president's party, but then the minority has to be comprised of the opposite party, right? So it is even though it's supposed to be independent, it's effectively partisan in terms of its composition. In a party line decision in Cemex Construction Materials Pacific LLC, the board ruled that when a majority of a company's employees file union affiliation cards, the employer can either voluntarily recognize the union, or if not, ask the board to run a union recognition election. If in the run-up to or during that election, the employer commits an unfair labor practice, such as illegally firing pro-union workers, which has become the routine, as we discussed just a few minutes ago, in every such election over the past 40 years, as the penalties have been negligible, the board will order the employer to recognize the union and enter forthwith into bargaining, which means basically, it's like, okay, you can either have a vote, you can either recognize the union, or you can arrange to have a full workforce vote to have a union take place. But if you try to engage in union busting, then it's just automatic that union, by force of law, is manifest. It's created. So that is incredibly pro-union. That is incredibly anti-union busting. It's going to make it so much easier for unions to form and for workers to collectively organize. Now, I do want to point out here, somewhere in this article, I may have to put on my glasses, there was some shenaniganry afoot, right? Like Republicans were hoping to run the clock out on this. So, okay, one reason that the 2 landmark decisions came down last week was that the term of one of 3 Biden appointees to the board, Gwen Wilcox, is just about to run out. Board terms normally last for 5 years, but Wilcox was appointed for just 2 years to fill out the balance of the term of a member who had retired early. So a person retired early, 3 years in, and Gwen Wilcox was appointed to fill that vacancy. Once she's off the board, there will be just 3 members, since one of the board's Republican seats has now been vacant for nearly a year. By mutual consent, the board is composed of 3 members from the president's party and 2 from the opposition. And when it has only 3 members, the board is forbidden from making decisions that change its rules. The normal procedure for filling seats on the board is that an appointee from one party comes before the Senate for confirmation in tandem with an appointee from the other party. However, hoping to thwart the now Biden-dominated board from making decisions like those of just last week, the GOP, backed by the conservative U.S. Chamber of Commerce, have declined to put forth a nominee to fill the vacant Republican seat, plainly hoping that Democrats would adhere to the custom of not breaking up an accompanied Biden appointee for a vote. And more precisely, they wagered that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who are conservative Democrats, relatively anti-worker, would deny that nominee the 51st vote required for that confirmation. Okay? So basically, they were banking on Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin doing what they typically do when it comes to like breaking the filibuster, for example, on any other major piece of legislation. So Republicans say, listen, the custom is a Republican appointee goes with a Democratic appointee, but we're not going to make a Republican appointee, which means if you're going to adhere to custom, you shouldn't offer a Democratic appointee. And then if you choose to break with custom, then you need the votes to do it. And Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who caucus with the Democrats, they're probably going to not go along with it. And then that would effectively cripple the NLRB for at least the remainder of Biden's term, and perhaps even longer still. I mean, I have no idea if President Biden gets reelected and Republicans had it their way, we could see this for another 6 years potentially, as far as I know. But instead, the NLRB acted proactively, they acted with vigor, and they came down with these landmark decisions. This is incredibly important. One other thing that I want to mention is in the video that we just watched, Trader Joe's was mentioned. And so Trader Joe's since this is like 5 or 6 days old, this decision. Since that decision came down, the Trader Joe's union has filed what appears to be the first charge under the recent NLRB ruling that says if a union demonstrates majority support and the bosses proceed to union bust, the board can scrap the election and just force the company to negotiate. Here's the best part. The ruling is retroactive, and the case pertains to the rampant union busting conducted by Trader Joe's leading up to the April election, which means it's almost certain, I can't imagine why it wouldn't be under the rules as described, that Trader Joe's will be forced to recognize the Trader Joe's union. I know that this doesn't sound particularly sexy or whatnot, but I imagine many of you who are watching, have worked for a union, want to work for a union, or currently work for a union. And this is just an incredibly pro-labor, pro-worker, pro-union decision. It shifts the balance of power away from the employer, away from corporations and businesses and companies that are inclined to prevent unions, to try to union bust, right? It makes it so much more balanced, which will almost certainly increase the prevalence of unions across this country. And that's because of Joe Biden. This is because of President Biden. This is because of the Democrats, okay, that we're able to do this. And you can see, as the article discussed, there was bad faith shenaniganry attempted by the GOP because they knew they didn't have the votes. So they do what they always do. They act in bad faith. They know when the majority opposes their decision, they try to rig the game in their favor or exploit the rules of the game to their benefit in ways that Democrats simply don't do. I mean, maybe from time to time, but certainly not with the instinct and the vigor that Republicans show time and time again, be it with Supreme Court justices or judicial vacancies, and yes, even, situations like involving, unions and labor laws and things like that. So this is a rare example where Democrats acted successfully in a way to thwart the GOP's killer instincts, and it's a way that, again, will deliver material benefits to countless American laborers and workers across this country. The sensationalist media is not going to talk about it because, again, it's not sexy, it's not sensationalist, it's kind of like, again, unless you work for a union, this is probably not going to be like headline news, right? It's not something like the latest deranged comment from Trump or what Marjorie Taylor Greene has said, or even like the indictments and constitutional matters, things that are also sensationalist but also very important. This is incredibly important, even if CNN, the New York Times, and others won't make a big deal about it. And we have President Biden and the Democrats to thank. So again, remember that. American workers, remember that as 2024 comes about. if you want to make a pro-labor, pro-worker, pro-union vote, you are infinitely better off voting for President Biden and the Democrats.